It was just another busy Friday morning when I received the call. I had barely started my day at the office when Maya's name flashed on my phone. Normally, I would have let it ring, knowing that she only ever called me during work hours for something important. But this time, something in her voice, even through the brief message, sounded off. "David, you need to come home. It's urgent." Her words hit me with a weight I couldn't explain. We hadn't spoken in the morning like we usually did. I had left early to meet with a new supplier and had been buried in paperwork since I got back to the office. Maya had been distant lately, but I thought it was just the usual stress of balancing the kids, school, and her daily routines. But now, hearing her voice crack over the phone, I knew something serious was happening. I couldn't help but feel that nagging, uncomfortable sensation in my gut. The kind you get when you sense that something's wrong, but you don't know what. Maya had always been the kind of woman who kept things together. Even when she was stressed, she never called me like this unless it was something life-threatening or urgent. "Hey, what's going on?" I asked, my voice trying to stay calm even though my pulse was already starting to race. There was a long pause and I could almost feel her hesitation through the line. "David, please just come home. It's important." I didn't need any more prompting. I grabbed my jacket, rushed out of my office, and jumped into the truck, my mind already racing through all the worst-case scenarios. I couldn't help but imagine the worst. What if one of the girls was in trouble? What if there had been an accident? My thoughts ran wild as I sped through the streets of Seattle, the busy city around me blurring in a haze of urgency. But as I neared home, a different kind of anxiety began to take over. I had been feeling disconnected from Maya lately. We'd been together for nearly 16 years, and while our love wasn't exactly the passionate flame it had once been, I never imagined we'd be on the verge of something like this. We had our problems, sure, who didn't? But this sudden shift in her tone was unsettling. I had always prided myself on being the steady one, the one who took care of everything, our business, our family. I managed a successful plumbing company, something I had built from the ground up, and Maya was my anchor at home. But what if that wasn't enough anymore? What if she had fallen out of love with me? I pulled into the driveway, my heart pounding in my chest. The sight of our house felt different somehow, like I was approaching a place I didn't belong anymore. As I walked to the door, the sense of dread deepened. Maya's car was parked in the driveway, but something felt off. The front door was slightly ajar, which was unusual. Maya was never careless about things like that. I pushed the door open gently, calling her name. "Maya?" There was no answer. I stepped further into the house, my footsteps heavy against the hardwood floors. The silence was deafening. I could hear faint sounds coming from upstairs, soft voices, but they weren't hers. I felt a knot in my stomach as I made my way toward the stairs. It wasn't until I reached the top that I saw what was happening. My world, the one I had spent years building, was crumbling before my eyes. Maya was standing by the window, her back to me, talking to someone on the phone. She hadn't even heard me come in. But it wasn't just her I saw. I froze as I noticed Robert, my brother, standing beside her. Robert, who I had trusted like a partner in life, my confidant, my family. He was supposed to be the one I could count on. But here he was, in my house, talking to my wife as if everything was normal. A wave of confusion and betrayal hit me all at once. It was like my body had gone numb, unable to process what my mind was beginning to understand. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, but I couldn't find my voice. Maya hung up the phone and turned toward me, her expression unreadable. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment there was nothing but silence. Then she spoke. "David, we need to talk." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My mind was racing, my thoughts scattered, but one thing was clear now. This was not a simple misunderstanding. Maya's expression faltered. The confidence she had when she spoke to me earlier on the phone was gone. She looked at Robert, then back at me, and I could see the guilt, the tension. She had been hiding something for months, no, maybe even longer, and I had been blind to it. The woman I thought I knew was standing there, a stranger, with my brother. The realization hit me with brutal force. I stood there at the top of the stairs, feeling the weight of the air pressing down on my chest. Maya and Robert were in my house, but neither of them looked like they belonged. The silence was suffocating. It wasn't the kind of silence that made you feel at peace. It was a thick, unbearable silence that screamed betrayal. Maya turned to me slowly, her face as pale as a ghost. She looked like she had just seen a ghost herself, but I wasn't sure if it was guilt or fear that was etched across her features. I couldn't read her anymore. I thought I knew her, but at that moment, the woman standing before me was someone I didn't recognize. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she said softly, her voice cracking. She took a hesitant step forward, but I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, the weight of what was unfolding crashing over me like a tidal wave. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. There was nothing I could say. The betrayal was too much to process. I had trusted Maya. I had built everything we had together, and now it felt like it was all falling apart in front of me. I don't know how to explain this," Maya continued, her eyes shifting nervously between me and Robert, who was standing there, awkwardly avoiding my gaze. "But I'm leaving, for good." The words hit me harder than anything I had ever heard. Maya was leaving, for good. The woman I had married, the mother of my children, was telling me that everything we had built together didn't matter anymore, that the life we had was nothing more than a broken shell. I took a step back, trying to steady myself. This couldn't be happening. I was still standing in our home, the place where we had built memories, where we had raised Ava and Lily, the house where we had laughed, fought, loved. How could she just throw it all away? I managed to speak, my voice hoarse, filled with a mix of disbelief and anger. "You're leaving me? For him?" My eyes darted to Robert, who stood by the window like a guilty child, his gaze still avoiding mine. Maya's face softened for a moment as if she was about to apologize. But then she shook her head. "David, I've fallen out of love with you. I never wanted to hurt you, but I'm with Robert now." My heart sank. It felt like everything I had worked for, every sacrifice I had made, was being ripped away in an instant. Maya wasn't just leaving me. She was leaving me for my own brother. I felt sick to my stomach. The betrayal stung in a way I couldn't describe. Robert had been more than family to me. He was my partner. We had worked side by side to build the plumbing business into what it was today. We had spent countless hours together, relying on each other, trusting each other. But now he had stolen the one thing I cared about the most. Robert finally looked up at me, his expression conflicted, like he was unsure of what to say. "David, I didn't let him finish. "No, don't, just don't." My voice cracked, and I could feel the tears threatening to rise. But I fought them back. I wasn't going to let them see me break down. Not now. Not in front of them. Maya handed me a thick envelope, the kind that looked like it contained papers I couldn't bear to open. Divorce papers. She was serious. She had already made up her mind. I'm sorry," she said, almost in a whisper. "But this is how it has to be. I need to go." I stared at her, not knowing what to say. She had already made her choice. She had already walked away from everything we had, and now she was dragging Robert with her, leaving me with nothing but the remnants of a shattered life. I grabbed the envelope from her hand, but I didn't open it. Not yet. Not when the anger and confusion were still fresh. I turned and walked out of the room, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the hallway like a death knell. I needed air. I needed space. My world was falling apart and I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Everything around me felt like it was spinning out of control. My head was pounding, my heart racing, and I couldn't keep the tears from stinging my eyes anymore. I stood in the middle of the living room, looking at the empty space. Our furniture, the pictures on the walls, everything that had once meant something to me, was now just a reminder of what I was losing. And then I heard it, a sound I never thought I'd hear in my own house, the sound of the front door closing. Maya was really gone. The day after Maya left, everything felt wrong. The house was quieter than it had ever been. I tried to focus on work, but every time I picked up the phone or looked at a document, the realization of what had happened hit me again. Maya was gone, and the worst part, she had left with my brother. I tried to keep my mind from spiraling, but it was impossible. The betrayal felt like a constant weight in my chest, pressing down with each passing minute. I couldn't escape the questions racing through my mind. How long had this been going on? How could I have been so blind? What was going to happen now? But there was one thing I needed to do. I had to know where she was. I couldn't just sit back and let her disappear without answers. I called the moving company, the one that had packed up Maya's things and left without a word. I had an inkling that something wasn't right, that Maya had not been entirely honest with me about her plans. The movers had to know where they had taken everything. The dispatcher was reluctant at first, but I wasn't in the mood for games. I was beyond caring about the usual formalities. I needed the address. "Look," I said, my voice tight with frustration. "I need the address where my wife's things were delivered. It's urgent. I'm her husband. I'm the one she left behind." After a long silence, the dispatcher reluctantly gave me the address. It wasn't far from where we lived, just a few miles outside of the city. I could feel my heart start to race as I jotted it down. It was like the walls were closing in on me. Maya had left me, but I wasn't going to just let this go. I needed to confront her. I needed to understand why. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I couldn't. I didn't want to hear anyone's advice or have anyone tell me how to handle this. This was my life, my family. I wasn't going to let it go without a fight. The drive to the address felt like it took forever. My mind raced, running through every possible scenario. What if she had just gone to stay with friends? What if I was wrong about everything? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized Maya wasn't just leaving to stay with friends. She was leaving me, and she was starting a new life. The address led me to a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place that should have felt peaceful. But for me, it felt like the calm before the storm. I parked my truck a few houses down, trying to keep my distance, trying to figure out how to approach this without completely losing control. I got out and walked toward the house. The door was slightly ajar and I could hear voices inside. At first I thought maybe I was mistaken, that maybe I was just being paranoid. But the closer I got, the more certain I became. This wasn't just a place Maya was staying. This was her new home. She was here, and she wasn't coming back. I pressed my ear to the door, trying to make sense of the conversation I could barely hear. Then my heart dropped. It was Maya's voice. But there was someone else with her, someone I knew all too well. It was Robert, my brother. I couldn't breathe. The anger surged through me, but it was mixed with a deep sense of humiliation and disbelief. My own flesh and blood, the person I trusted most in this world, had been sleeping with my wife. I couldn't stand there anymore. I wasn't sure if I was about to explode or if I was going to collapse from the weight of the betrayal. I knocked on the door, my fist slamming against the wood. It took a few moments, but finally Maya opened the door. Her eyes widened when she saw me, her expression shifting from surprise to guilt to something I couldn't quite place. Robert stood behind her, his face pale, his body tense. "David," Maya said, her voice shaky. "What are you doing here?" I couldn't speak at first. My chest was tight, my body frozen in place. I just stared at them. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but the words wouldn't come. "You left me for him?" I finally managed to say, my voice low and dangerous. Maya's eyes flickered to Robert, then back to me. She looked like she was about to say something, but no words came. There was no explanation that could make this better. Nothing she could say would take away the pain. "David, please," Robert finally spoke, his voice shaking. "It's not what you think." "Not what I think," I interrupted, stepping forward. "You've been sleeping with my wife behind my back, and you want me to believe it's not what I think?" I saw Robert flinch. I wanted to make him feel as small as I felt in that moment. Maya stepped in front of him, her hands outstretched as if to stop me from moving any closer. "David, I never wanted it to end this way," she said, her voice breaking. "But I've been unhappy for a long time. I've tried to tell you, but you didn't listen. And Robert, he understands me." The words cut deeper than any knife ever could. She didn't just leave me. She left me for my brother, the one person I thought I could trust more than anyone. My mind couldn't comprehend it. How long had this been going on? How could they both lie to me for so long? I felt my chest tighten. I was suffocating. Everything I had believed in, everything I had worked for, was crumbling in front of me. "Just go," I said, my voice cold and empty. "Just go and don't look back." And with that, I turned and walked away. I didn't look back, not even once. The drive back to the house felt like the longest journey of my life. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. Each passing minute was a battle against the anger that churned within me. I had just discovered that Maya, the woman I'd shared my life with for over a decade, had not only left me, but she had left me for him, my brother Robert, the same brother I had trusted implicitly, the one I'd built my business with, the one who had always been by my side. The house loomed in front of me as I pulled into the driveway. It should have felt familiar, comforting, but now it seemed foreign, like a place that no longer held any meaning. My family, my life, had been ripped apart by betrayal. I could barely stomach the thought of facing either of them, but I knew I had to. I had to confront them both. I had to hear it from their mouths, no matter how much it would hurt. As I walked up the stairs, the door swung open before I could even knock. Robert was standing there looking like he had been expecting me. His face was pale, his eyes nervous, but there was no remorse, no apology. He looked at me like I was the one in the wrong, and that made the anger inside me burn hotter. "David," he said, his voice low and defensive, "you don't have to do this. We can talk about this." I didn't respond at first. My body was tense, every muscle in me wound tight like a coiled spring. I didn't trust myself to speak, not yet. I wanted to hurt him, but I didn't know where to start. The betrayal felt so deep, so personal, that words didn't seem like enough to convey how much he had destroyed me. Instead, I stepped past him and into the house, my eyes scanning the familiar surroundings that now seemed like a twisted mockery of everything I had known. Maya was standing by the window, her back to me, the same way she had been when I first walked in. But this time she didn't turn around. She didn't even acknowledge my presence. "I never wanted this," Maya said softly, almost as if she were talking to herself. "I didn't want it to happen this way." "Then why did it?" I asked, my voice rising. "Why did you let this happen, Maya? Why didn't you tell me? I would have worked with you, I would have done anything, but you just left me. For him." Maya turned to face me then, her eyes avoiding mine, her face flushed with shame. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I saw the guilt in her eyes, but it wasn't enough. She had made her choice, and now all I was left with was this hollow feeling in my chest. "You knew," I said, turning my gaze toward Robert, who was now standing just behind her. "You both knew, and you couldn't even find it in yourselves to tell me. You just took everything from me." Robert shifted uncomfortably, looking away. "It wasn't like that, David. We didn't want to hurt you." "Really?" I shot back. "Then what was it like, Robert? You've been my brother for years, and you've known Maya almost as long as I have. How could you do this to me, to us?" He opened his mouth to reply, but I didn't give him the chance. I couldn't. The rage inside me was too much, too consuming. I felt like I was going to explode if I didn't say everything that had been building up inside me. "How long?" I demanded. "How long has this been going on? Behind my back, in my own house, in my life, how long?" Robert's face went ashen. He looked like he was about to say something, but stopped himself. Maya finally spoke up, her voice trembling. "It started a long time ago, David," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it wasn't what you think. I didn't plan this. It just happened." "Just happened?" I echoed bitterly. "You think that makes it better? That makes this okay?" Maya stepped forward, but I held my hand up, stopping her. "No, don't even try to explain it, Maya. You made your choice, and now I'm left with nothing." The room was thick with tension, and yet I couldn't bring myself to leave. I couldn't walk away from this, my family, my brother, my wife, without hearing them admit what they had done, without understanding why they had destroyed everything. "I don't know what you want me to say, David," Robert said finally, his voice strained. "But I never wanted to hurt you. You've been a great brother to me, but this is something that's been between me and Maya. We're done, Robert," I interrupted, my voice cold. "There's no fixing this, not anymore." I turned to Maya, my heart aching. "You were the one person I thought I could trust. And now you've betrayed me in the worst way possible. I don't even know who you are anymore." Maya's eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't find it in myself to care. I had nothing left to give her. She had taken it all when she walked out the door with my brother. I turned and walked out of the house, not looking back. The door slammed behind me, but it didn't make the sound I wanted to hear. I had expected something final, something that would end the chaos in my mind. But it didn't. It only left a gaping hole, one that I didn't know how to fill. The moment I walked out of that house, everything in my life began to fracture. Each step away from Maya and Robert felt like I was walking away from the person I used to be. The person I thought I was, strong, reliable, steady, was gone. I didn't recognize myself anymore. I had spent years building not just a family, but a life, a business, something that was supposed to last. I thought we were partners in every sense of the word. But now, standing outside that house, all I could feel was the sting of betrayal cutting deeper than any knife could ever do. I needed space. I needed time to think, to breathe. So I left. I went to the only place where I could think clearly, where I wouldn't be suffocated by the ghosts of my past. I went to the office. The moment I stepped into the building, it felt different. The familiar hum of phones ringing, the smell of coffee brewing, the energy of the team working, it was all still there. But for me, it was like stepping into a world that no longer belonged to me. I had built this empire with my brother, John. Together, we had expanded, grown, and turned our family's business into something bigger than we ever dreamed. But now it felt hollow. I sat down at my desk, my hands resting on the surface, staring at nothing. The weight of the divorce papers Maya had left behind was still in my hands, though I hadn't even opened them yet. I didn't need to. I already knew what they said. She was asking for everything. The house, the kids, my world. She had taken it all, and now she wanted to finish what she had started. I couldn't believe it. The woman I had built everything with was now demanding the very thing I had spent years protecting. And my brother, the one person I trusted above all others, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I felt lost, like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure if I should jump or just stay where I was, frozen in place. But I couldn't stay here anymore. I couldn't work alongside John, the man who had stolen my life. I thought about the countless hours we had spent building this company, the sacrifices we had made to get to this point, and now it was all falling apart. I couldn't do it. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when everything was broken. I dialed the number for the real estate agent, trying to keep my voice steady. "I want to sell the house," I said, my words coming out flat. "And I need to get the business appraised. We're putting it up for sale." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. "Are you sure, Mr. Clark?" the agent asked gently. "I'm sure," I replied. "It's time to let go." Hanging up, I leaned back in my chair, staring at the walls that once felt like a reflection of my success, now a constant reminder of everything I had lost. The decision was made. There was no going back. I reached out to my lawyer, preparing for the next phase of this nightmare. The divorce was inevitable, and I knew it would be a fight. Maya would fight for everything. She would fight for our daughters, for the house, for the life we had built. But I wasn't going to give up without a fight of my own. I needed to protect what little I had left, the business, my dignity, my children. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, I thought about the future. The life I had planned was gone. There was no fixing what had been broken, but there was still one thing I could control, the direction I was going to take, the direction I wanted for my daughters. I didn't want them to see me as a failure. I didn't want them to think their father was weak, broken by the betrayal of the two people I loved most. I had to show them that I could rise above this, that I could rebuild for them. But it was more than just a decision about the business. It was about my life, my identity. I had worked for years, sacrificing my time, my energy, my soul to build something. But now I saw the cost. The price of that success had been higher than I ever imagined. I had lost my family, my trust, and in many ways myself. The decision was clear. I would leave the business. I had no choice but to step away from John. I couldn't work beside him anymore. Couldn't look him in the eye, knowing what he had done. I would sell my shares, take what was mine, and walk away. It wasn't just about money or property anymore. It was about reclaiming my life. I reached out to my mother, knowing she would support me. knowing she would understand. The conversation was brief, but I didn't need to explain much. She knew what was happening, and she knew what I needed. The following morning, I called John. His voice was tight with the same anxiety that I felt. But there was no turning back now. "I'm done," I said. "I'm selling my shares. You need to buy me out." The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally he spoke, his voice strained. "James, please. We can figure this out. It doesn't have to end like this." "No," I said firmly. "It ends now." I hung up the phone, feeling a strange sense of finality wash over me. It was over. The life I had known was gone. But in that moment I realized something that scared me but also gave me hope. I was free to start over, to rebuild what I had lost. The first few days after Maya left felt like I was walking through a fog, unable to see or think clearly. I had been living in a dream for so long, a dream where my family, my business, and my life had all come together. But now that dream had shattered, and I was left with the jagged pieces. I woke up to an empty house, a place that once felt like home but now felt like a foreign land. The silence was deafening. For years I had shared this space with Maya, and the absence of her was suffocating. Her scent still lingered in the air, the remnants of her presence in every room. But now those reminders were nothing more than ghosts of the life we had built. I tried to focus on work, but it felt like an impossible task. My mind kept drifting back to Maya and Robert. I couldn't stop replaying the conversations in my head, the moments when I should have known something was wrong. How could I have missed it? How could I have been so blind to everything? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing everything. The business, the house, the life I had worked so hard to build, it was all slipping through my fingers. But what hurt the most was the realization that I had lost Maya. The woman I had trusted with everything, the woman I had shared my heart with for so many years. I sat at my desk one evening staring at the pile of papers in front of me, trying to make sense of the mess my life had become. But all I could think about was Ava and Lily. How would they feel? What would they think of their father when they found out the truth? That their mother had left, that she had chosen someone else over their family. I wasn't sure how to handle it. I wasn't sure how to talk to them about all of this. Maya had always been the one to handle the emotional conversations, the one who kept everything together. But now, that responsibility fell on me. I needed to be strong for them. I had to be the father they needed, not the broken man I felt like. But it was harder than I had imagined. Every time I saw them, I felt like I was suffocating. How could I explain this to them without breaking down? How could I tell them that the family they had known, the life we had shared, was gone? I made an appointment with a lawyer to start the process of figuring out custody. I knew Maya would fight me for the girls, but I wasn't going to back down. They needed me. They needed someone who wouldn't betray them, someone who would protect them no matter what. The day of the meeting, I walked into the lawyer's office with a sense of finality. This was it. This was the moment where everything changed. I was no longer just David Clark, husband and father. I was David Clark, someone who had to fight for what was rightfully his. "I'm ready," I said, trying to sound confident. But inside, I was anything but. The lawyer went over the details of the custody arrangement, outlining how difficult the battle might be. "It's going to be tough," she said. "Maya will fight for primary custody, and you'll need to prove that you're the more stable parent." I nodded, my stomach tightening at the thought of what that would entail. I knew I had to be prepared, but the thought of fighting for my own children, of having to prove my worth as a father, felt like a betrayal in itself. It wasn't just Maya I was fighting anymore. I was fighting for a life that I thought I had already earned. As the meeting wrapped up, I stepped out of the lawyer's office and into the bustling street outside. The weight of the world felt like it was pressing down on me. My heart was heavy with a mix of fear, anger, and grief. But as I stood there on the sidewalk, something inside me shifted. I couldn't let this defeat me. I couldn't let this break me. I thought of Ava and Lily, their faces flashing in my mind. They were the only thing that mattered now. They were my reason to keep fighting. They were my reason to keep moving forward, even when everything else seemed to be falling apart. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew there would be days when I'd want to give up, when the weight of the world would feel too heavy. But I also knew that I had to keep going. For them. For me. As I walked away from the lawyer's office, I felt a sense of determination wash over me. This was my life now. I wasn't going to let Maya or anyone else take that away from me. I would rebuild, I would fight, and I would win. I had always been certain about one thing in my life. My daughters were mine. Ava and Lily, the two people I cherished most in this world, were my flesh and blood. That certainty was the foundation of my world, the anchor that kept me grounded even when everything else seemed to be falling apart. But that certainty began to crack the moment Maya left. It wasn't just that she had walked away with Robert. It wasn't just the betrayal that had shattered our marriage. It was the sudden flood of questions I'd never thought to ask before, things I'd always taken for granted. How could I have been so blind? How could I have missed the signs? The more I thought about it, the more my mind raced. There were things that had never sat right with me, small things I had brushed off over the years. Maya had always been secretive about certain aspects of her life, about her past, and now, looking back, I began to question everything. Could they be Robert's children? Was I really their father? I couldn't shake the thought. It started as a whisper in the back of my mind, a nagging suspicion that refused to leave. The more I thought about it, the more the doubt began to grow. I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring down at the abyss of my own insecurities. The foundation of my life was eroding beneath me. What if everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie? I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to know. I spent the next few days trying to avoid the inevitable conversation. I didn't want to ask the questions that were creeping into my mind. I didn't want to shatter the last pieces of my confidence. But I couldn't help myself. The fear was consuming me. What if Robert had been involved with Maya long before I even suspected? What if I wasn't the father? What if my whole life had been a lie? The idea of questioning my own paternity felt like a violation. It felt like a betrayal to my daughters. But I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when a part of me was dying inside. Finally, I made the call. I contacted a lawyer asking about paternity testing. The words tasted bitter in my mouth. I felt like a failure. I couldn't even trust the children I had raised for over a decade. The lawyer was professional, detached. He explained the process to me in cold, clinical terms. I would need to have both Ava and Lily tested, and the results would take a few weeks. It sounded so simple, so matter-of-fact, but to me it felt like a betrayal. It felt like I was admitting that I couldn't trust my own flesh and blood. I hung up the phone and sat there in silence for what felt like hours. The doubt was a weight in my chest, a suffocating presence that wouldn't leave me. How could I have not seen it? How could I have been so stupid? Later that evening, Ava and Lily came home. They didn't know about the paternity test. Maya had always kept the truth from them, kept the world we had built together a secret. But now I was left to deal with the mess of it all. I wasn't sure how to look them in the eye. They had been through so much already. They didn't need their father questioning their existence, questioning their very place in my life. But the doubts wouldn't go away. I tried to act normal, tried to pretend everything was fine, but every time I looked at them, the questions resurfaced. The way Ava sometimes smiled a little too much like Robert. The way Lily had certain mannerisms that reminded me of him. Were they his? Could they be? I felt like a stranger in my own home. The bond I thought I had with my daughters was now clouded by the specter of doubt. I loved them. I knew I did. But I couldn't stop asking myself, am I their father, or had I been living a lie all these years? Days passed in a blur. I tried to focus on work, on the business, but nothing felt right anymore. Every decision, every moment felt tainted by the uncertainty that was now a part of me. I began to distance myself from everything, avoiding calls from the lawyer, avoiding the girls, avoiding the life I once knew. I could feel myself slipping. The paternity test was the only thing left to do. It was the only way to know for sure. But the idea of what the results might show, what they might confirm, terrified me. I wasn't sure I was ready for that. As I sat in the silence of my house staring out the window, I thought about what was coming next. Whether I was Ava and Lily's biological father or not, it didn't change how I felt about them. But could I really keep pretending that everything was okay when the truth might be something completely different? I sat at my desk, staring at the documents before me. The decision was no longer a question. It was a fact I had come to terms with. Maya, Robert, the betrayal, the shattered trust. It had all led to this moment. I was done pretending everything was fine. I had to let go of the past, of everything that tied me to the life I once thought was perfect. The family business, the company I had poured my heart and soul into, was no longer mine to control. It didn't matter that I had helped build it from the ground up with John. It didn't matter that I had sacrificed everything for it, my time, my energy, my personal life. What mattered now was finding a way to reclaim my dignity, my peace of mind, and my future. The idea of selling the business had been something I had pushed away for weeks, telling myself that I could work through the pain, that I could somehow rebuild from the wreckage. But the truth was, I couldn't do it. Every corner of the office, every conference room, every meeting felt tainted with the memories of John and Maya. Their faces, their betrayal, everything that I had once built was now a constant reminder of my failure. I couldn't keep working alongside my brother. The thought of walking into the office every day, sharing the same space as the man who had destroyed everything, was unbearable. I had no choice. The only way I could ever truly move on was to sever that last tie that held me to the past. I reached out to a broker, arranging the sale of my shares. The process felt surreal, like I was stepping out of my own life, watching someone else take control. The financials were solid. The business was still valuable, but it was no longer mine. It was as if I had been living in someone else's world for far too long. And now I was stepping into a new reality, one that had no place for John or Maya. As the call ended, I felt the weight of the decision settle in. There was no going back now. The business would be sold and John would no longer be a part of my life, but the emptiness that remained felt as if it was swallowing me whole. I sat there for what seemed like hours, the weight of everything pressing on my chest. I had lost my wife. I had lost my brother. I had lost the business that had once been my pride. What was left? What was there for me now? I stood up, walked out of the office and into the empty hallway. The silence was deafening. There were no more meetings, no more projects, no more promises. It was over. The life I had known was slipping away, piece by piece. But in the silence, I found something. I found clarity. The decision to leave it all behind was the first step toward reclaiming my life. I had spent too long trying to hold on to something that was never truly mine to begin with. It was time to move forward. I thought of my daughters, Ava and Lily. They were the only things that mattered now. I had to be strong for them. I had to rebuild not just for myself, but for their future. They deserved a father who was whole, who wasn't weighed down by the ghosts of the past. I picked up my phone and called the real estate agent. "I want to sell the house," I said, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. "Let's get it listed as soon as possible." There was no turning back, but for the first time in weeks I felt a small flicker of hope. I was moving on. I was starting over. And I would do it for them. The first day I woke up in my new place was a strange mix of relief and emptiness. The moving truck had come the day before, and now the apartment was bare, save for the few belongings I had decided to keep. Everything else had been left behind. The house, the business, the family that no longer felt like mine. But here I was, standing on my own for the first time in what felt like forever. I was alone, and yet, for the first time in months, I didn't feel completely lost. The heavy burden of betrayal was still there, sitting in the back of my mind, but it was no longer suffocating me. The future seemed uncertain, but there was one thing I knew for sure. I had to rebuild. Not just for me, but for Ava and Lily. I had always been the one who held everything together, the one who provided stability, but now I realized something important. True strength wasn't in holding on to the past, but in having the courage to move forward. I had been so consumed by my past, by Maya and Robert's betrayal, that I'd forgotten what it meant to live for the future. I had to let go of the idea that I could somehow fix things with them. What had happened was irreversible. The only thing left for me was to rebuild my life, brick by brick. I reached out to my lawyer and started the process of setting up visitation with the girls. Maya had been granted primary custody, but I wasn't going to let that stand in the way of my relationship with them. I wasn't going to let her take everything from me, not when it came to the love I shared with Ava and Lily. The first time I saw them after the separation was harder than I could have imagined. They looked so small, so vulnerable, and I could see the confusion in their eyes. They didn't fully understand what was happening, but I could tell they felt the shift in the air. My heart ached as I hugged them tightly, trying to reassure them with my presence. "Don't worry," I whispered, even though I wasn't sure I was convincing myself. "Everything's going to be okay." They didn't speak much during our visit, but they clung to me, just as I clung to them. The time we spent together was bittersweet. It was a reminder of what we had lost, but it was also a glimpse of the bond we still shared. Despite everything, they were my girls. They were the light I needed to keep going. In the days that followed, I began to take small steps toward rebuilding. I didn't want to rush it, didn't want to force myself to feel better. I knew it would take time, but I also knew that I had to make a conscious choice every day to move forward. Every day I made a choice to rebuild myself, to heal, to grow. I started by focusing on the little things I had neglected for so long. I made sure I ate properly, even if it was just a quick meal at home. I exercised, though it was difficult at first. I found comfort in taking long walks through the city, clearing my mind and letting the fresh air fill my lungs. These simple routines became a foundation for me, a way to ground myself in the present instead of drowning in the past. And then there was work. I had sold my shares in the family business, but the skills I had learned over the years didn't just disappear. I began to explore new opportunities, reaching out to old contacts and looking for new ventures. The idea of starting fresh, of creating something on my own, was daunting, but also thrilling. It wasn't just about business, though. It was about rediscovering who I was outside of the roles I had always played. I wasn't just a husband, a father, or a businessman. I was James, and I needed to remember what that meant. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of looking through job postings and project opportunities, I collapsed onto the couch. My mind was spinning, but I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in a long time. I realized that, for the first time in months, I wasn't overwhelmed by the weight of the past. I'd begun to find a sense of balance in my life again. The following weekend, I had the girls over for a few hours. This time, we spent the day at the park, just the three of us. It felt like a step forward, even though the future was still uncertain. We laughed, we talked, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like we were a family again, broken, yes, but not beyond repair. As I watched Ava and Lily play, I felt a sense of hope stir within me. The future was still unclear, but I was no longer afraid. I had my girls, I had my strength, and I had my resolve. It wasn't going to be easy, but I would rebuild. I would be the father they deserved. And one day, I hoped they would understand that, despite everything, I never stopped fighting for them. What do you think of James and his journey through betrayal and rebuilding his life? From which region are you watching this video? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss any of our stories. And don't forget to check out more heartwarming tales by clicking here on the end screen.